Well, welcome back to Open to Truth, a podcast all about exploring big ideas and discovering truth together. My name's Clint.
Hey, I'm Tony. Welcome back.
And today I want to talk about a topic in philosophy called the ethics of belief.
Okay.
I've been thinking about this, just a few conversations I've had with folks on, I guess, some controversial topics that have the tendency to produce heated reactions. It didn't happen in these couple of cases, but I think one reason for that is this perspective that I've come to have about belief and belief acquisition that might be helpful to our listeners as well. This is a hotly contested discussion in philosophy, in the literature, but
So it's not the final word.
it's not the final word.
Is this something that has recently changed in your thinking? You just said the way you've come to think about it. Is that something that changed recently? Did you read something or?
Good question. Yeah, I would say in the relatively recent
Okay.
history, within the past 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what the catalyst is. If this is something you've just noticed in yourself changing over time, which is kind of ironic because that is what we're about to talk about, is noticing oneself believing different things.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's frame it this way.
Yeah.
Got a little bug in my throat there.
Okay.
So there's this claim we could start with in the ethics of belief where you ought to believe what you have evidence for, and you ought not to believe what you don't have evidence for. If there was ever going to be an ethic, what you ought to do about belief, that's a pretty good starting place.
You ought to believe what you have evidence for. You ought not to believe what you don't have evidence for.
Don't go out on a limb and just start believing something you don't have the evidence for. And then once you do have enough evidence, you should then adopt that belief. Don't
I don't know if this is really
be forever fence sitting.
I don't know if this is really annoying right off the get-go. But that statement alone, that little ethical axiom, how do you come to believe that? What's the evidence supporting that? You ought to believe things you have evidence for. There's a claim, an ethical claim. You ought to do this thing.
Yeah.
What's the evidence supporting that claim?
Well, good. So you stumped me a little bit.
Got him.
I would say this is going to be annoying, but the first thing that flashed before my mind was something about intuition. And just
I'm fine with that. I'm fine
Okay.
with appealing to a moral landscape, say an ethical landscape. That some things are true ethically, and we have a sense about them. I'm fine with you appealing to that. I'm just wondering making sure this thing's not self-defeating in some way.
Yeah. I think a big argument in favor of it would be something of like a reductio ad absurdum, assume the opposite and then find a problem.
Yep.
So imagine it wasn't this way,
Yeah, let's do that.
where it's permissible then
Believe anything.
to believe without supporting evidence. Oh, you really don't.
Or to believe the contrary of what the evidence points to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's how it was generated. Like the alternatives seem preposterous.
If nothing else, even if we don't go to the realm of the ethical, things would fall apart very quickly if evidence wasn't something we valued when it came to constructing beliefs. If it was believe anything, regardless of any evidence anywhere, our whole system would fall apart pretty quickly.
Right,
You know?
yeah.
So there's a pragmatic sort of incentive to adopt this
I think so.
way of thinking. Okay.
Now, so does that strike you as a pretty...
Yeah, it,
Fair.
seems,
Like,
it
would you
seems
hold
really
it?
reasonable.
Okay.
It seems reasonable. Like when you say it, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
I should believe things I have evidence for, and I should not believe things that I don't have evidence for. Now, maybe there's a distinction to be made in terms of what counts as evidence, because I don't think you're trotting out the old verificationism of
No.
sort of science of if I can't touch, see, smell, taste, measure,
No,
then
no,
I
we
don't
can-
believe it.
We can have a broad
Yeah.
view of what
Okay.
count as evidence.
Yeah. Okay.
So I agree that it's pretty compelling. Now, here's the common objection is we can bring in, if I'm botching this, I think it was Hume who first made the quip, ought implies can. So there's something in ethics where if you're going to say that I ought to do something, then that implies that I am able to do it.
Yeah.
I can't have a moral injunction that I am not able at all, or it's possible for me to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So
it needs to first belong to the set of possible actions Clint can take. Yeah. Okay.
And so applying that to this case, it's not immediately obvious, actually, like when you inspect it a bit, that this is something that's possible. So let's just apply the terms here. I ought to believe what I have evidence for. That's saying that I can choose to believe.
You can steer it in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can choose to believe what I am going to believe on the basis of that evidence.
Yeah.
And now here, so
you're saying the word ought implies with it sort of a volition, a choice of some kind.
That you're able, well, just what is that if we take the ought implies can and put it on this particular ought that we're investigating, what's the can that it's implying?
Yeah.
It's implying that you can direct your belief in a certain way.
Okay.
This is the thing that you have control over, that you have a moral decision to make about.
Got it.
Now, here are two kind of responses or two positions in this field that I kind of want to explore today. And it's called doxastic voluntarism.
Jeez.
Big word. Or doxastic involuntarism. And all this means is doxa having to do with belief and voluntarism having to do with your free will or volition. So doxastic voluntarism would be you have control over your beliefs. And you can choose to have certain beliefs or to not. And the involuntarist says it's involuntary. It's more that you just find yourself believing certain things rather than you're really directing your volition toward adopting a certain belief.
Yeah, right. So for the doxastic involuntarist, I guess we can call them.
I'm not in control of my...
Then they wouldn't agree to this statement. You ought to believe things you have evidence for. You ought not to believe things you don't have evidence for.
Right.
For them, then, what is the relationship between belief and evidence? What role does evidence play? If it's not the case for that, someone who holds that view that you sort of gather evidence, hold these choices before the mind, and then choose. I'm going to believe this guy. I'm going to believe this way. If that's not how it works, and it's rather as we're sort of pulling in evidential sources, we are just finding ourselves adrift in a sea of belief, sort of riding the currents of the every wind of doctrine.
Yeah, a bit.
Okay.
So let's walk through some. So just to be clear, the statement I ought to believe what I have evidence for assumes, I think, doxastic voluntarism, that I have a degree of choice over this.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we can just be totally on board with that initial ethical axiom, let's try to solve this other problem of is who's right, the voluntarist or involuntarist about your beliefs. Well, before we cast too many aspersions about either view, let's just look at different things that we typically believe. Yeah. And see kind of just do your own inventory.
Anecdotal, how have I arrived at my beliefs?
So I have a belief right now that you are sitting before me. And I don't feel like I have any choice in the matter about this. I am so overwhelmed by my perceptual apparatus that you are here, a lot of background assumptions about object permanence, and that solipsism isn't true, that I'm not the only thing in the universe. And so here you are. Do I have voluntary control over that belief? Could I really not believe it?
Well, what do you think about... I do feel like I have the ability to almost take different beliefs for a test drive, or like trying them on like a set of glasses. Like as you sit here, couldn't you, for a moment, for 3 minutes, imagine solipsism to be true, and inhabit that, and have get a sense of what would it be like to view the world from the perspective of a solipsist? Yeah, couldn't you do that? But then you're just saying that at the end of the 3 minutes, you'd go, well, I'm not convinced, or...
Well, I would say there, and this is where it's helpful to define what a belief is. I think a belief is a propositional attitude. It is an attitude I have toward a state of affairs, or a way that the world is. And that attitude is accepting, holding, endorsing. So the claim, Tony is not really sitting here before me, it's a robot or it's a figment of my imagination or something. Sure, I can try that on for a little bit, but I have not. That is not a belief. I'm not doing the attitude of endorsing. It's of entertaining.
Can't it eventually reach that point though? Like I'm thinking I think there might be some beliefs in my life that, like a set of glasses, I tried on and never took off. And I was like, after a while, I was like, actually, yeah, this makes sense to view it this way. Or like I can remember Dr. Craig in one of his Q&As talking about a guy who decided to try atheism for 3 months or something. And then 3 months turned into the rest of his life, you know? It's just like the practicing of a different lifestyle or not cultivating a relationship with God in some way ultimately led him to disbelieve in that.
See,
God.
that to me, both of those stories sound like
Involuntarism.
Yeah.
Okay. He found himself no longer theistic.
That's the whole language of it. If you ever are tempted to use that phrase, then you might be leaning more toward the involuntarism side. That you just find yourself believing something. So you tried something on. You did make a voluntary decision. And this is where I'd make the distinction of saying, no, it's not that you don't have any control over your beliefs.
You're not denying free will.
No.
No.
You have free will over how you choose to spend your time. And that could include different sources or avenues of evidence that you're pursuing to help influence your belief forming process. So the trying on of Christianity or of atheism or whatever it happens to be, or of Tony's skepticism. And I could or could not find myself believing that thing that I tried on for a moment.
Okay. I have another little pushback there, though. If you're saying we do have control over, say, how we spend our time, where we search for evidence, that sort of thing, it seems to me that even the search for evidence would be influenced by prior beliefs that apparently I had no control over choosing to believe. I'm wondering how has my whole life just been me being sort of a domino effect of the first thing I found myself believing that led me to search for evidence in particular places because of what I already believed, and then select among those to believe something new. Well, find myself believing something else. You know what I'm saying?
I do. So this is a tricky conversation that we're kind of trying to hold before our minds several different like big philosophical arenas. One was ethics. Now we're talking about epistemology and how that works. And then over here, free will.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you are a determinist or a fatalist of sorts, then you're obviously going to be an involuntarist. Right. Everything falls in the category of you didn't have control over. So certainly some would say about your domino thing, yeah, man, your life has been that way. And so has all other events in the cosmos.
Yeah.
If you are going to be a free will libertarian or libertarian view of free will, not political, but that just means like total freedom in the sense that I'm a unmoved mover that's unconstrained. I genuinely can choose among a range of options. Then I think you can still be a doxastic involuntarist. It just means that's all that's saying is that you can't at any given moment just decide to believe something different.
That does seem
you can freely choose to do certain things that will eventually influence that belief. It's almost like, how about this?
And
how about this analogy? Just that you are controlling the sail for a sailboat of which direction to try to harness the wind, but you can't make the wind go a different direction.
Right.
I don't know if that helps.
So there's actually some interplay. It's kind of a both end where there is some degree of domino effect, I think, in terms of prior beliefs, maybe influencing what you even perceive as a possible venue for evidence, you know? Prior beliefs could influence that. But I do have some choice over the world that it presents itself to me and where I look in that world. So I can see there being sort of a both. I actually think the sailboat analogy is a good one. You can't stop the wind, but you can hopefully harness it. No, I like that.
So maybe in the immediate perceptual evidence and beliefs that arise from it is a pretty like strong case for involuntarism. But of course, there's other types of beliefs that we have, and the ones that have maybe of more interest to the inquisitive philosophical minds that are listening to this. Even in the Christian scriptures, a lot is placed on, I mean, the reason that this is important and worth talking about, a lot of emphasis is placed on belief.
Oh, sure.
Like apparently it's really important for you to believe these set of truths about the gospel or about Jesus.
Yeah.
In order to, whatever, at the very least have a flourishing life, perhaps life everlasting.
Yeah.
And so,
And in fact, it's often presented as something you have control, a choice you need to make. Choose metanoia, change your mind, repent and believe the good news.
right.
So, yeah.
So in these more complex beliefs, let's say, that's not just immediate perception where I just feel overwhelmed. I kind of have to believe
Right.
about the states of affairs that are right before me. But some are a bit more abstract, less clear. Let's say Jesus is God. The Joe Biden, it's a good thing that Joe Biden was elected president. I mean, that's a really complicated question. And let's say I come to have a belief about that. You might wonder, okay, I get that you might be involuntary about this other, like, more banal stuff, but for more complicated things, you do have a choice over it, right? Do you feel tempted to go that direction? Where the belief is so complex that I'm piecing together, in order to even have the belief at all, I'm piecing together a lot of different things from different disciplines and different areas and then I just decide to believe one way or another.
Yeah. It's certainly, you're right. That sort of thing doesn't feel as compelling or overwhelming as your immediate experience, sensory experience does, those sort of abstract things. I don't know if I'm tempted to say I have more control over that. Because just as I mean, anecdotally, just as I look at my own life and the way my beliefs have formed over the years,
there aren't really these discrete moments where you're like, okay, now I believe this.
I can't point to a moment in time where I sat there and went, eeny, meeny, miny, this one, you know?
Or even less random, where
where I had some intention, like evidence or whatever. Yeah. No, it is more like a gradual gradient, a gradual finding yourself thinking differently about things. Even finding yourself reacting emotionally differently than you used to is a part of it. I find certain things get said that I would have resonated strongly with 10 years ago, and now I find no reaction inside. Or things that I would have been like, yes, now actually cause anger in me. That's weird. Something has changed, you know? And it's not the statement. It's something in me that's changed. So, yeah, I'm with you.
So I think what this does for those pursuing the intellectual virtues, if doxastic involuntarism is true, that happens to be the view I hold right now, I think it pays dividends in interpersonal relationships and conversations. Because now I'm less, I guess I feel less likely to impugn another person with bad character traits or motives when they have ideas that I think are bad.
Yes.
Because on my new story of involuntarism, they didn't sit down one day and say, I choose that one.
Yeah.
Where there's really a lot of agency and control over that. I can kind of tell the story now where throughout their life experience and what's happened, they find themselves believing that right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And now maybe the things I will say next will contribute to that whole melting pot of data that their belief forming apparatus will select from to form the next one. This
is one of the things that I do find attractive about someone like a Sam Harris's view of free will, which his view is you don't have it. It's an illusion. And I get that is frightening, actually, in some ways. But the one perk that I do see, the one thing that does attract me to that view is when you think about the worst humanity has had to offer in terms of criminals or murder, whatever, the worst people you can think of. If you assume they actually had no choice in any of that, and had I been born in their shoes, the dominoes would have fallen so that I do exactly the same things. That it just causes you to have a bit more grace towards them, or at least me, where you could see this serial killer being tragic in the same way a hurricane is tragic. It's like this horrible thing happened, but there's no agent sort of behind it. And so let's deal with this tragedy. And rather than maybe punish this guy, maybe we can rehabilitate, maybe we can help him in some way. So I do find that attractive. I see what you're saying, that similarly, even if we retain free will at large, but this doxastic involuntarism, it allows you in those conversations to have the same kind of compassion for where somebody's at in their journey of belief. This is where they find themselves at this point.
Right. I mean, and I have to watch myself too with these like hot button political topics of, I don't know what it could be, abortion, open border policy, whether to give money to inner city schools. I mean, there's so many things where both sides might, like, frankly, just be completely bewildered at how another person could think
that.
Yeah. They must be pure evil or something. Well, on this view then, on doxastic voluntarism, that makes a little bit more sense why someone might be
Why would you choose to believe that? That's a horrible thing to choose to believe.
Yeah. Whereas with the involuntarists, they kind of find themselves believing it. Now, again, we can recommend, that's why I like pointing people to sources of evidence or to do training in philosophy to where you kind of broaden your, your vision for what would even count as evidence, and being willing to look at what you think to be contravening evidence and seeing the value in that. There's all these different ways that we could influence our and other people's beliefs. Yeah. But just to demand, like, okay, now think differently about this. I can't.
Well, then, so on that, I just do want to go back to briefly the scripture piece and how this ties in with sort of Christianity and an emphasis on belief. What then is the right approach to, I mean, a lot of the evangelism I've seen over the years is very much focused on getting them to say something, getting them to say they agree with something.
Yeah, I think we brought doxastic voluntarism to the table when we interpret scripture. We
being the church.
Yeah, just like traditional evangelical. It's like when you read the word belief, I'm thinking you've usually brought a whole philosophical parcel with you called doxastic voluntarism. But why did you do that?
Yeah.
It didn't tell you to do that. There's so many things like that
we bring to the table. Oh, man. Yeah.
So believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord and you will be saved.
Well, it could actually cause a lot of anxiety if it's presented in this voluntaristic way and you find yourself struggling or unable to believe that particular thing, you know?
Like, you could give it an involuntarist interpretation where, it's less a command. It is just a statement.
Yeah.
When you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, then you'll be saved.
Yeah.
Okay. This is something that will happen when I believe. Okay. Now I would like that to happen.
Yeah.
So let me do some things in my life that will lead to it being more likely that I find myself having that belief.
Yeah. Maybe I need to read more about who Jesus was and what he said and what he did. Yeah. Yeah.
Then, rather than the voluntarist perspective, which would almost more commend some kind of just like muster it up. Come on. Well, find it within yourself. Like, believe it.
Yeah, but okay. Don't people say that though? Fake it till you make it. Act yourself into a new way of thinking.
Well, that's kind of bringing it full circle. You brought that up earlier of the trying on a perspective.
Yeah. And you still just, you maybe have the choice to try it on, but the attitude of endorsing, accepting, believing arises.
You could recommend that process, whether you're a voluntarist or involuntarist.
The trying on of lenses.
Yeah. It's just the difference between these two views is there a moment when you take the reins of your volition and say, I believe it, and you have full control over that. I'm not convinced. I can't think of a single belief that I have
where that's how it happened. Yeah. No, I don't think I can.
So that's what's so interesting to me about this is one case of how interesting philosophy can be. We started with a very intuitive, sensible idea that you ought to believe what you have evidence for, and you ought not to believe what you don't have evidence for. Just like a good scientist, But then you just inspect it further, and like when I really examine the phenomenology of my belief experience, it's not like that.
I can't do that, actually. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, is that a useful axiom to throw? Because I've heard you throw that around before. You ought to believe what you have evidence for and ought not to believe things you don't have evidence for.
You've heard me use that in favor of a position?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm sorry, man, to call you out. I don't think I've heard you do it on the show, but
okay.
In private, mate, I've heard you say that. But maybe the way you believe, the way you think about it has changed over the years.
Yeah, maybe I just found myself not believing that or saying it as much.
Yeah.
And again, like I started the episode people debate this. I could be wrong. But
anecdotally.
Yep. I find myself.
I'd love to know what you at home, watching, listening, what's your experience been? If you have an experience of sort of exchanging beliefs and worldview and that sort of thing, we would love to know what your experience has been with this. Do you feel like you've had control over what you find yourself believing, or which part of that process do you feel like you've had control over? Leave a comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening at home. You can always reach us, mailbag@opentotruth.com, and we interact with everything you guys send us. So
Absolutely.
We'd love to hear what your experience is like.
And if you like to read about ideas, we have a weekly blog that you can go to opentotruth.com/subscribe when you get home. Just like, hey, I want to support the show. I'm going to go subscribe to this blog. It's good. It's 3 to 4 minute reads.
Yeah, you'll love it.
On these topics.
You'll think to yourself when it arrives in your inbox, you'll think, man, I'm glad I did that.
Oh,
I'm so glad. That's what you'll think. So give it a go. opentotruth.com/subscribe.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching.
All right. We'll see you next time. Stay curious.